Having lost members of her own band and her manager in a tragic plane crash in 1991, Reba understands the distinct weight grief carries. "I know what it feels like when your world changes in a single moment," she said. "That's why I want to be there for Kelly and the kids however I can." Grief never really disappears. It reshapes you, but with enough love and support, it can also build strength. Reba acknowledged that the children are still very young, and that their relationship with grief will continue to evolve. River and Remy are handling it in their own ways, she explained. River is older and asks more questions. She wants to understand what happened. Remy, being younger, mainly needs reassurance. To feel safe and loved, and Kelly makes sure they both feel that every single day. She stressed that keeping memories alive is one of the healthiest ways families can heal. Kelly talks to them about their dad. They look at photos together and they share stories about happy moments. That keeps Brandon close to their hearts. When they do that, the kids don't feel like he's completely gone. They carry him with them. Reba spoke with deep admiration for Kelly, not only as an artist, but as a mother. "I've always loved Kelly since the moment she became part of our family," she said. But seeing her now, watching how she puts her children first while carrying her own grief with such grace, that's something extraordinary. She added that she couldn't be more proud. For longtime fans of both women, Reba's words offer reassurance during a painful chapter. Even as marriages end and family structures change, the bond between Reba and Kelly has remained rooted in respect and care. "Family is family no matter what," Reba said. "Kelly and those kids will always be my family, and I'll always be here for them." In the end, her reflections underscore a simple truth about loss. Grief is painful and lasting, but it doesn't have to be faced alone. With love, memory, and connection, it becomes something people learn to carry forward. Together, Marilyn Monroe once again stepped away from Hollywood, retreating into isolation as exhaustion took its toll. The break, which lasted several months, reflected the emotional and physical strain that had become a recurring pattern in her life. When she resurfaced in late 1959, it was not with renewed excitement, but with obligation. Her return came through the musical comedy Let's Make Love, a project she accepted largely because her contract with 20th Century Fox required her to complete additional films. Monroe was painfully aware that, despite her fame, the studio still held significant control over her career. Agreeing to the role was less about creative fulfillment and more about professional necessity. Still, she attempted to shape what she could, insisting that respected director George Cukor take the helm. Known for his work with formidable actresses such as Katharine Hepburn and Judy Garland, Cukor was seen as someone capable of drawing out Monroe's deeper abilities. Her husband at the time, acclaimed playwright Arthur Miller, tried to salvage the project by revising portions of the script. Monroe had openly criticized the material as shallow and uninspired, and Miller hoped his rewrites might give the story greater substance. Despite these efforts, production quickly unraveled. Monroe's behavior on set grew increasingly unpredictable, causing repeated delays. Her chronic lateness and unexplained absences frustrated cast and crew alike. Much of this stemmed from her escalating reliance on prescription medications intended to manage anxiety, insomnia, and chronic pain. Instead of stabilizing her, the drugs often left her disoriented and unreachable, deepening the strain on an already troubled production and creating a tense working environment. The situation escalated further when Monroe became romantically involved with her co-star, French singer and actor Yves Montand. The affair dominated headlines worldwide, particularly because both were married at the time, Monroe to Miller and Montand to actress Simone Signoret. The studio seized on the scandal, weaving the attention into the film's promotional campaign in hopes of driving interest. Despite the publicity, Let's Make Love premiered in September 1960 to disappointing results. Critics were largely unimpressed and audiences responded with indifference, viewing the film as a squandered opportunity, weighed down by weak writing and Monroe's lack of focus. The final film, Marilyn Monroe, completed was The Misfits in 1961, directed by John Huston and written specifically for her by Arthur Miller. The project was meant to deliver the complex, dramatic role she had always wanted. Playing Rosalind, a vulnerable divorcee in Nevada, Monroe shared the screen with Clark Gable, Eli Wallach, and Montgomery Clift, bringing her career to a somber and haunting close. The role was intended to finally reveal Marilyn Monroe's emotional fragility and inner strength, qualities long hidden behind her glamorous image. Instead, the making of The Misfits became one of the most punishing experiences of her life. Shot in the relentless Nevada desert between July and November of 1960. The production was physically exhausting and emotionally volatile from the outset. At the same time, Monroe's personal world was collapsing. Her marriage to Arthur Miller was unraveling under the weight of emotional distance and conflicting values. During filming, Miller began an affair with on-set photographer Ing Morth, a betrayal that deeply wounded Monroe. What hurt even more was her growing belief that Miller had woven elements of her own pain and insecurity into the character of Rosalind Monroe. Increasingly felt that Rosalind existed primarily to advance the stories of the male characters, rather than stand as a fully realized woman in her own right. The role became emotionally unbearable, not only because of its raw parallels to her life, but because she felt exposed without empathy. Adding to the strain, Miller frequently rewrote scenes late into the night, sometimes delivering new pages just hours before filming. These last-minute changes left Monroe unsteady and unprepared, intensifying the self-doubt she had battled throughout her career. Her physical health was also rapidly declining. She suffered from gallstones that caused persistent pain, and her reliance on barbiturates and sedatives had escalated dramatically. Often, she arrived on set barely conscious. Makeup artists sometimes began their work while she was still asleep, groggy and disoriented. By August of 1960, her condition deteriorated so severely that production was halted and Monroe was hospitalized for detoxification. She spent a week under medical supervision in an effort to stabilize her health. Although the recovery was short-lived, Monroe still delivered a deeply affecting and restrained performance in The Misfits, one later regarded as among her finest. Tragically, neither she nor Clark Gable lived to witness the film's eventual critical re-evaluation. Gable died of a heart attack days after filming concluded, and Monroe would pass away less than 2 years later, her life marked by fame intertwined with private anguish. Despite everything, Monroe's legacy extends beyond tragedy. At a time when women in Hollywood were routinely dismissed, she fought for agency, challenged studio power, and established Marilyn Monroe Productions in 1955. It was a daring declaration of independence, affirming her determination to be more than an image, and to claim control over her own voice. This decision was revolutionary for a woman in Hollywood at the time and revealed Marilyn Monroe's fierce resolve to be taken seriously as more than an image. Born Norma Jean Mortensen, her private life was turbulent and deeply emotional, shaped by a lifelong search for love, safety, and stability. She married 3 times, and each marriage ended in divorce, reflecting both her vulnerability and her longing for connection in a world that rarely offered her security. Her first marriage came remarkably early and was driven more by circumstance than affection. In June 1942, at just 16 years old, she married James Doherty, a 21-year-old neighbor. The marriage was encouraged by her foster family as a practical solution to prevent her from being sent back into the orphanage system when they relocated. Doherty was kind and protective, but the relationship lacked emotional depth and shared ambition. While Doherty served in the Merchant Marine during World War II, Norma Jean worked in a munitions factory, where she was discovered by a photographer. That moment altered the course of her life. Modeling opportunities followed, then acting, and with that transformation came independence. Doherty reportedly struggled with her growing confidence and career aspirations, particularly her modeling work. By 1946, the marriage ended. Norma Jean was no longer the quiet, domestic teenager he had married. She was becoming Marilyn Monroe, driven by dreams far larger than either of them had imagined. Her second marriage was far more visible and emotionally charged. On January 14, 1954, Marilyn married baseball legend Joe DiMaggio in a ceremony that captivated the nation. DiMaggio, a retired New York Yankees star, was deeply drawn to Marilyn and wanted to shield her from the pressures of fame. Yet his protective instincts often clashed with her professional identity, a private and traditional man. DiMaggio struggled with Marilyn's status as a global sex symbol and the provocative roles that defined her career. Their differences came to a head during the filming of The 7-Year Itch, when Marilyn's now iconic subway grate scene was shot in front of a massive crowd. DiMaggio was reportedly furious and humiliated by the public spectacle. Their opposing desires proved irreconcilable. Marilyn sought creative freedom and self-expression, while DiMaggio wanted a conventional marriage and resented the attention her fame brought. After just 9 months, they divorced in October 1954. Despite the breakup, DiMaggio remained devoted to her, later honoring her memory by sending roses to her grave several times a week for decades. A quiet testament to a love that never fully faded. Marilyn's third and final marriage was to acclaimed playwright Arthur Miller, and it marked her most earnest attempt to find emotional depth and intellectual partnership. Their relationship began quietly in the mid-1950s and culminated in marriage on June 29, 1956, with a modest civil ceremony followed by a Jewish service 2 days later. For Monroe, the union symbolized her longing to be recognized as more than a glamorous icon. She wanted to be taken seriously, to be valued for her mind as much as her image, and she believed Miller's stature and insight could offer that affirmation. In the early years, they shared a genuine emotional connection. Marilyn admired Miller's intellect and convictions, and she even converted to Judaism as a gesture of respect for his faith. Yet the foundation of their marriage was fragile. Monroe's ongoing struggles with anxiety, depression, and dependence on prescription medication weighed heavily on the relationship. At the same time, relentless media scrutiny and Miller's discomfort with her celebrity created growing distance between them. Miller's own frustrations reportedly surfaced in his private writings, deepening Marilyn's feelings of inadequacy and isolation. By 1961, just 5 years after their wedding, the marriage dissolved. The divorce left Monroe emotionally shattered, reinforcing the divide between the confident, public figure the world adored and the deeply vulnerable woman she felt herself to be. In the decades since her death, Marilyn Monroe's final days have remained the subject of intense speculation. Officially, her passing on August 5, 1962, was ruled a probable suicide caused by a barbiturate overdose. For many, that explanation never fully settled the questions surrounding her death. Alternative theories persisted, ranging from accidental overdose to darker suggestions of interference by powerful interests. Recently, renewed attention fueled by declassified documents, long-suppressed witness accounts, and modern forensic reevaluations has reignited debate. These findings suggest a far more unsettling possibility. Rather than simply a tragic figure overwhelmed by personal struggles, Monroe may have been a vulnerable woman, caught in a complex web of influence and secrecy. Central to this emerging narrative is evidence indicating that she was under observation by government agencies due to her rumored relationships with President John F. Kennedy and Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy. Once dismissed as gossip, these connections are now supported by surveillance notes and transcripts implying she may have been exposed to sensitive discussions. Additional photographs and testimony have also surfaced, raising troubling questions about potential tampering at her home and casting new shadows over a mystery long thought resolved. In the hours before and after her death, several former law enforcement officials have since claimed under anonymity that they were pressured by senior authorities to limit what was documented. According to these accounts, phone records were adjusted, personal notebooks were removed and never returned, and discrepancies surrounding the timeline of her death were quietly left unresolved. These actions, they argue, were not accidental errors, but part of a deliberate effort to prevent deeper scrutiny. The most disturbing question raised by these revelations is not only who may have intervened, but why. At the height of her fame, Marilyn was also profoundly isolated, still searching for meaning, stability, and trust in a world that rarely offered her safety. There were reports that she had considered holding a press conference to share information she believed she had learned during intimate relationships with some of the most powerful figures in the country. Allegations range from overheard political discussions to connections involving organized crime and influential insiders. Central to these claims is the existence of a so-called Red Diary, said to contain detailed notes that some believe became a source of concern in the days leading up to her death. In her final months, Marilyn was widely described as emotionally fragile, increasingly anxious and fearful. The question that lingers is whether this behavior reflected a genuine psychological crisis, or whether she was being subtly manipulated into appearing unstable, making any potential disclosures easier to dismiss. This emerging interpretation reframes Marilyn Monroe not as a powerless icon overwhelmed by fame, but as a woman who may have found herself entangled in forces far beyond her control. Rather than a simple narrative of personal collapse, her death is now viewed by some as the result of fear, secrecy, and competing interests. If these claims hold weight, the implications are deeply unsettling. What was long accepted as Hollywood's most tragic overdose may represent something far more calculated. Marilyn Monroe may have died alone, but the circumstances surrounding her death continue to raise questions that extend well beyond her bedroom, touching on the uneasy intersection of celebrity, power, and silence. Don't forget to subscribe, and follow for more untold stories behind Hollywood's most unforgettable moments.